Hello and welcome. My name is Melissa McVie and I am part of OARC's education team. In this short video, I will be providing a high-level overview of some of the recent changes that have been made in Section 3 of OARC's popular resource guide entitled Supporting Your Home's Residence Council. Section 3 covers some important information about your resident council operations. It takes a deep dive into the foundations of council meetings. For example, how can you encourage residents to attend and be more engaged at your meetings? We explore some strategies for running effective meetings. Section 3 also gives you some guidance to help make your meetings more accessible and inclusive for everyone. Most people will reference this section when seeking some direction for running resident council elections, as we have laid out some key steps here to help you through the process from the nomination and planning stages to the actual execution of the election and the follow-up afterwards, including counting your ballots. In this section, we also touch on council finances. And OARC has identified the need to update some of the information to help residents and their supportive partners to manage resident council finances. So we'll be touching on this important area as well in today's video. So if you're not familiar with OARC's resource guide, I've actually included a picture here of the front cover of this resource binder. So it might be helpful if you'd like to hit pause and take a moment to locate the hard copy of your binder so that you can use it to follow along as I highlight some of the key updates in our refreshed Section 3. This resource guide was published about 6 years ago and distributed in hard copy to all long-term care homes across Ontario. This guide can also be accessed online in its entirety on the OARC webpage under the Tools tab. The guide is designed to help resident council leaders, resident council assistants, and home administrators support and sustain effective resident councils in their homes. The education team with OARC is re-releasing sections of this resource guide with some refreshed promising practices and refreshed language. And a lot of the practices and terminology that you'll see throughout are reflective of some culture change that's been happening in long-term care. And if you tuned into the accompanying video for Section 2 of the resource guide, we did devote several slides to talking about what this culture change is all about and what it has looked like over the last several decades in the long-term care home sector. So if you haven't had a chance to tune into that companion video, I'd encourage you to do so now before digging into Section 3. Another change that you'll notice that's occurred throughout the resource guide is that we've changed a few key terms, including removing staff and replacing it with team members. The term team members is used because it's much more inclusive and positive. People who work in long-term care homes are part of a team. You'll also notice that the term staff assistant has changed to become residence council assistant. So those are the two big ones that you'll see consistently through the resource guide and the refresh sections. So next, when we're thinking about meeting attendance and what motivates residents to participate, there's a number of things. Firstly, we really want to be clear about what the Residence Council is, what it's all about. Why is it important for residents to have a regularly scheduled meeting, a safe resident-only space to discuss their experiences among their peers and offer support to one another. Once we have a better understanding of that, we can go a little bit deeper. We know resident councils are an opportunity to meet and build relationships with residents from throughout the whole home, from various floors, home areas, or neighborhoods, and learn what is new in the home, and also take some time to celebrate with fellow residents. Attending a residence council meeting may also be sparked by a trust and confidence that resident concerns can and will be addressed through the participation. Attending a council meeting may inspire that feeling that each person is not alone and that they have the opportunity to contribute to increasing and improving quality of life and care for all residents. If residents perceive that the council is an effective forum for resolving concerns, implementing new ideas, and sharing suggestions, they are more likely to return to a meeting. Preparing and distributing a list of accomplishments that have occurred as a result of council involvement, even over the last 6 to 12 months, may provide residents with some physical, tangible evidence that council affects change in their home. Residents are more likely to return to a future council meeting if they feel that their ideas and their suggestions are given some serious consideration. We also want to take some time to market the residence council in your home. Residents also respond positively when they are personally invited by their peers and escorted to attend meetings, especially new residents in the home. If your resident has an overhead announcement system, like a PA system, residents might also appreciate that extra reminder before the meeting is to start. Some councils have created meeting reminder cards that can be placed prominently on the dining tables for a visual cue and reminder to attend as well. You could make these or print them on heavy cardstock paper and even laminate them so they can be reused for each meeting. Leading up to your next resident council meeting, you might consider inviting residents for an informal tea or coffee chat to really talk about what the council is and encourage their participation. And when you're in these kind of conversations, it's important to remind residents that their help is needed and that their voice matters. So they might feel, again, that little boost of encouragement to attend an upcoming meeting. In order to have meaningful meetings, you need to identify some areas of interest for your meeting agenda. And there's a number of ways to get some of that information. It might happen more organically through some social conversations with your peers. Perhaps you strike up a conversation at a program or at a meal and try to delve into what's important to that individual or group of residents. You might also consider hosting a forum or an open meeting, kind of like a brainstorm session, to talk about topics in advance of your next resident council meeting. Ask for, or at a council meeting, to dedicate some time to discuss or receive suggestions for future topics or area of interest that could be covered in an upcoming meeting agenda. It's important to take some time to identify your resident council leaders so that the residents know who to approach with ideas, questions, or concerns in between meetings as well. If your home has them, you might consider promoting or encouraging the use of suggestion boxes And if you don't have them, you might consider trialing having either a general suggestion box for resident council, or in a larger home, you might consider having suggestion boxes on each resident home area or each floor. In some cases, resident councils have created their own questionnaire that could be distributed to elicit feedback about topics of interest. What are residents wanting to discuss or learn about through their residence council? It's also really important to, once you have received this important information, it's so important to follow up and close the loop. And be sure to include these topics and make a plan for exploring these topics at future meetings throughout the year. This will reassure residents that when they bring ideas or concerns forward, they will be taken seriously. So next we want to talk about planning an effective meeting, and there's a number of components that we're going to touch on here. Resident council meetings are for residents by residents. Planning and running a successful meeting takes planning and teamwork. When establishing your meeting time and schedule, be sure to get resident input. Are morning or afternoon meetings preferred by the majority of residents in the home? You might need to use a bit of a trial and error approach and adjust your meeting schedule over time to meet the changing needs and preferences of residents in the home. Be sure to communicate your schedule to the home's management team and programs department to ensure that conflicting or competing meetings or programs are not being booked at the same time slot as the reoccurring resident council meeting. Residents shouldn't have to choose between another program of interest like bingo or a bus outing. Resident council meetings should be a priority meeting on your activity calendar. We also want to make sure that we select that we endeavor to keep our meetings to that 1 hour or less time frame. Otherwise, we might start to lose people's interests. And it's important to keep things flowing. You want to try to follow your meeting agenda as a general guideline. When you're planning ahead of time, you want to look at the topics you'd like to cover and protect time for each discussion topic. It's also important to allow for some flexibility here, because there might be a topic that is really creating a lot of engagement, and so you might end up devoting more time to this topic than anticipated, so other items on your agenda might be pushed or deferred to a future meeting. It's also important to select a meeting space that allows for privacy and has minimal noise or distractions. Ideally, the resident council will have use of a meeting room with doors that can be closed wherever possible. When you're planning your meetings, you also want to make sure that you're coming prepared to welcome new residents. Perhaps you might have a getting to know you game or icebreaker to make new residents feel included, and to allow other residents to get to know these new faces at the council meeting. Another helpful tool is OARC's opening guidelines and closing remarks, or you could even create your own welcoming statement. The whole point is to create or to set a positive, inclusive tone at your meetings. So by reading a short paragraph that welcomes and thanks people for their participation is a really great way to do so. So OARC's tool is available on our website. We also think it's very important about how you're setting up the meeting space. So we encourage you to refer to pages 106 to 109, and there's not been any changes in this particular area, but there's a very helpful guide for arranging your tables and seating in the space. And each different room layout has some advantages and some drawbacks. So it's helpful to go through this list with your group and see what's going to work best for your council. And again, the layout and the desires of the resident group and the needs may change over time, so you might need to also adapt and change your layout. So your meeting agenda is a list of topics to be discussed, and it lays out the order in which they will be discussed. You're going to create this meeting agenda in advance by meeting with your resident council leaders and getting their input. And there's different ways of doing it, but you can pass out hard copies of your agenda at the meeting. And many councils will post the agenda in advance of the meeting so people know what subject matter is going to be covered. I have seen a number of resident councils making a conscious effort to go paperless to reduce paper waste in the home. So the agenda, instead of passing it around and printing multiple copies of it, they're actually projecting the agenda on a smart TV or screen in the meeting space, which is nice because you can enlarge the font and scroll down to follow as you progress through your meeting agenda. OARC has taken some of the guesswork out and helped create an agenda tool or guideline that can be utilized by councils. This tool is available on the OARC website as well under the Tools tab. And this tool, as well as OARC's meeting minute tool, make sure it's been designed to cover all aspects or all areas allowed for in the Long-Term Care Homes Act. And it lets residents know all the possible discussion items for resident dialogue or involvement in their home. OARC suggests using this agenda and the Resident Council meeting minute template to ensure that residents are aware of all the possible topics that could be covered for meetings throughout the whole year. And each template will cue and let the residents know what should be covered quarterly or annually or on a monthly basis, and so on. Section 3 goes into some greater detail about creating your meeting agenda, so I would encourage you to reference the resource guide on pages 95 to 90 through to 97. I just wanted to share a few words about meeting minutes in passing here. Your minutes provide your council with a written record of your meetings. They can be as simple or as detailed as your council prefers. Ultimately, the residents decide what will be captured in their meeting minutes. They also will decide where the approved meeting minutes will be posted in the home. Your minutes serve an important purpose. They capture your council's concerns, highlight activities and accomplishments. It's a useful document to track concerns and complaints. And it also helps to highlight resident council efforts and point out any priorities for the group. Your recording secretary, which could be a secretary on your resident council leadership team or the resident council assistant, this individual is responsible for recording the minutes and then reading them aloud at the next meeting. A motion to accept the minutes as read serves to confirm that everyone agrees that the minutes accurately reflect what was discussed during the previous meeting, as well as what people agreed to and any decisions that were made. Another important part of Section 3 is about running or facilitating your meetings. Residents decide who will facilitate or chair the meeting, and this may be a shared responsibility. And it might look very different from council to council. In some cases, the residents have asked their council assistant to carry out this duty. In some homes, a member of the resident council executive, such as the president, might chair the meeting, or in some homes, residents may co-chair or share the facilitation duties amongst the team of resident leaders. There is no right or wrong way. You decide what is going to work best for your group, and this may change over time. It is important that the chairperson or persons possess some key qualities to keep your meetings flowing well. They should be open to all ideas and perspectives and focus on both individual and council strengths. The chairperson should ensure that all viewpoints are heard by giving each resident the opportunity to speak and share using a go around the room approach, or by implementing something tangible like a talking stick as a physical prop or tool to signal when someone has the floor, and you can pass it on to the next person and so on. It's also important to remind the group that the council is honored to speak on behalf of everyone living in the home, so keeping those in mind who cannot speak for themselves is imperative. Summarizing throughout your meeting is another important skill, and particularly at the end of the meeting. The chairperson may choose to do this by acknowledging any work done or any accomplishments since the last meeting, summarizing some major decisions or activities, tasks, or actions to be accomplished, as well as reminding the group who is responsible for completing them for that follow-up piece. And sorry. Another aspect is assessing the meeting, taking the time to talk about how the meeting went, what was covered, and getting some feedback. Maybe there's some suggestions on how to improve things for the future. Next, we want to talk about some facilitation skills and tools that might be helpful to keep your meetings on track. So we've talked a little bit about this chairperson who's running the meeting. This person can really help to cultivate a climate of cooperative solidarity in the meeting so that everyone's feeling comfortable sharing. If you look at pages 104 and 105, we focus on some of the qualities of an effective meeting facilitator. And these are actually reproduced with permission from the Java Music Programs Incorporated. We talk about some strategies for problem solving in different situations and working with different or strong personality types. For example, in almost every group, you're likely to interact with someone who shares engaging stories, but that can sometimes feel like someone is monopolizing the meeting. There's also residents that might bring complaints forward, and then you might have people who don't feel engaged at all. They're the non-participants. So we want to make sure that in all cases, we support and give people a chance to speak up. We take time to validate their perspectives, hear where they're coming from, thank them for their participation, but then a strong facilitator will have some tools in their arsenal to gently redirect the conversation to get you back to your agenda or your discussion topic at hand. Improving accessibility for your resident council meetings offer residents opportunities to fully participate, and it helps to promote a positive atmosphere of mutual support, which is inclusive of all residents. If you notice that a resident is having difficulty accessing council activities and meetings, a good starting point might be to ask, "How can I help you?" Residents are your best source to understand what they may need to get involved with the council. Pages 110 through 114 of the resource guide will help bring some awareness and deepen your understanding about some of the sensory changes or challenges, as well as communication barriers that some residents may be experiencing. And these include changes with hearing, vision, mobility, communication, including speech and language challenges, and language barriers. So the language barriers section is a new addition, and I would encourage you to take a peek at that as to see some new promising practices. We also have, and this is not new, but we've updated the accessibility checklist. So this is a really great tool to pull out to really test and see, are your meetings as accessible as they possibly can be? And you might be surprised. It's important that resident leaders and their supporting partners are sensitive to the changing needs of residents so that residents can continue to contribute in meaningful ways. To help you with this, we have put together an easy to follow checklist. So that starts on page 115. So you might even print it and keep it handy and go through that with your resident council leaders on a regular basis. So there's a number of pages that are devoted to resident council elections. And on the whole, this section remains largely unchanged. However, we have added some new information to distinguish how an election for a traditional executive model of leadership may differ compared to that shared leadership model, which is growing in popularity. And it's usually characterized by being more flexible and more inclusive. So this update can be found on page 123. And I would encourage you to highlight that section, especially if you have transitioned to the shared leadership model. Essentially, with a traditional executive, you typically only have those 4 office positions of president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer to fill when you're planning an election. With a shared leadership model, the council can decide if there is an ideal or desired number range of resident leaders to serve as part of the team. And this number, once you land on it, will be captured in your resident council bylaws document. As a general rule of thumb, 4 to 8 resident leaders is a good range to stick with when forming your leadership team. And when it comes to elections, your council will follow the nomination process that's outlined earlier in this section of the resource guide. However, the number of nominated leaders, resident leaders, may determine whether a formal election with the ballots is actually warranted. There may be no need for an election. For example, if the council has decided that the leadership team will consist of 6 people and 6 people have been nominated, then there's no need to have an election. In this situation, they would call it an election by acclamation, which means that each each person is automatically part of the shared leadership team. Another addition to this section was some guidance around selecting and electing your home area representatives. Home area reps or resident ambassador positions help to ensure that resident perspectives from every floor or home area are recognized and brought forward at the General Residence Council meeting each month. It is up to the individual Residence Council to determine how the home area representatives will be identified. You may choose to formalize your process and use that nomination, the nomination steps that are outlined in this section of the resource guide. Alternatively, residents may be approached or volunteer to assume the role of home area reps. If there is substantial interest in these positions, an election with a ballot system may be warranted. However, it is also acceptable for nominees to automatically be placed into the roles if there's only one or two residents interested in representing their respective areas. This process as an election, or is known as an election by acclamation, which we just discussed with the shared leadership example. And OARC recommends that councils select at least 2 home area representatives from each area of your home. This way, if one person is unable to attend the general council meeting, then there's still another person who can share an update or report on their respective floor or home area. We also would encourage you to continue to use the elections checklist on starts on page 125 and goes to 128. This again will help cue you every step of the way in planning and executing and following up after your election. So you might consider printing and keeping this handy when you have your election, whether that's on an annual basis or another schedule that the residents have pre-agreed on. Now, we would be remiss not to devote some time to discuss resident council finances. There are increasing restrictions and stricter policies at financial institutions and banks in recent years that have created some additional challenges for resident council financial management. These barriers include, and they're certainly not limited to this list, the majority of banks no longer provide door-to-door service. There was a time where some local branches might have sent a representative to come to the home to support the process of opening or updating a bank account, but this seems to be increasingly rare. Many residents do not have the required valid photo identification that the financial institutions are seeking or requesting in order to become a signing authority on the account. And increasing numbers of residents are experiencing cognitive changes. And as a result, they are unable to take on fiduciary responsibilities for the council bank account. Previously, OARC had discouraged resident council assistants or home management from becoming signing authorities. We felt that would be a conflict of interest and that those were to be kept separate. But some councils have found this to be a viable solution for maintaining a bank account in light of these increasing barriers that I just touched on. So in some cases, resident councils are approaching their home administrator or resident council assistant or another trusted partner in the home to take on the role as signing authority for the resident council bank account, especially if new resident leaders are unable to be added to the account. Wherever possible, resident leaders should still be encouraged and supported in the process of reviewing finances, managing the treasury or logbooks for your finances, and writing checks, even if a pre-approved home employee or council assistant becomes the signing authority. So the resident can still write out the check, write out the details, be involved in the record keeping, and the team member in the home can just physically sign. And there might be multiple signatures required on your checks, which is why some councils are seeking the support and the involvement of more than one team member in the home. And I just wanted to take an opportunity to highlight that OARC has just launched, so it's hot off the press, a fact sheet on resident council finances for quick and easy reference. And so I have included the web address there. So it's a double-sided cheat sheet about council finances that is reflective of these the changing climate and some of these barriers to managing finances. So before we wrap up, I did want to highlight a few action items for you to consider moving forward before we draw this video to a close. So first, I would encourage you to please reprint the refreshed section 3 as well as section 1 and 2 if you haven't already done so. You'll want to replace the old sections in your resource guide binder with the new ones, as the old ones are now considered to be outdated. There's still lots of helpful information in there, but the refreshed sections have a lot of new promising practices, and whether you choose to print the hard copies or continue to access the resource guide in its digital form, we encourage you to use the most up-to-date information. You might also want to consider adding a hard copy of your resident council documents in section 3, those that we've touched on, including the agenda template that you're using, meeting minutes, any financial logs or bank records. Some councils find it helpful to keep a template for their election ballot so they can make photocopies or use that for future elections if you are using ballots. I'd encourage you to protect some time to review the changes in greater detail for section 3. Really refamiliarize yourself with some of the ways that you could create accessible and meaningful resident council meetings in your home. Maybe brainstorm a list of some of the barriers for council operations, and then look again at some of the skills and the traits of effective meeting facilitators. See if there's any key takeaways there, things that you might like, maybe some new ideas or promising practices that you would like to bring forward for discussion for maybe a possible trial with your resident council. So our hope is that this update video and getting reacquainted with section 3 might spark some new ideas for you and maybe get you thinking a little bit differently about the way your council operations have been running to date. Perhaps it's time to think differently or to shift some aspect of your council operations. So thank you so much for your time and participation. As always, we look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions or any areas for clarification about section 3 or any aspect of the resource guide or other OARC tools or education opportunities. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach the OARC team at our toll-free line 1-800-532-0201. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Oh my